frankly, it feels embarrassing. It feels demoralizing. It's professionally demoralizing. And I think this is adding to the burnout. Physicians now have the top suicide rate of all professions in America. Take heed, America, because, you're losing your physicians in so many ways.
Marion, welcome to PedChat.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So my first question is an icebreaker question. I've asked it to everyone. What did you want to be growing up?
Initially, an attorney. And when I was in fourth grade, I saw some television program in which a lawyer had to defend someone who was guilty, and they knew that he was guilty. And I am a deep-seated justice girl. For me, justice always matters. And I literally gave up my ideas about being an attorney that day. I moved on, and I always had a proclivity for the sciences and, a love for the natural world. My father was a hunter. I used to dissect the squirrels in the garage. And so it was a natural, easy move for me to move to medicine.
From dissecting squirrels to pediatrician. Tell me about that.
Sure. I don't have a conventional pathway. Never do. I started in college. I worked for Merck, the pharmaceutical company, doing research. And I was actually published, and I thought I was going to be a researcher. So when I started at Duke Med School in 1990, I was an MD PhD candidate. I had a full ride through the medical scientist training program, and I was going to get a PhD as well and, go off and, cure cancer, whatever I thought I was going to do. And I got at Duke, we all do 1 year of basic science, your bookwork kind of stuff. And then we move on and do a year of clinical. I had never really done much clinical medicine. I didn't shadow doctors or things like that. My world was research. And I fell in love with clinical medicine. I just fell in love. Research was something I could work hard at and I could succeed and it felt good. Clinical medicine was where my heart was. So what could you not love about peds? I mean, your patients are innocent. Kids are plastic. They heal, and you sort of feel like you also have like a fresh piece of clay to work with and to help and to mold, and you can influence a lifetime of good habits that bring health. So
a lot of the pediatricians I've talked to recently, in particular the middle career ones, a lot of them are starting to feel stuck and burnt out. And I feel like it has to do with the changes in the medical ecosystem in America.
Huge.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. So physician burnout, there's a group called the Physicians Foundation. They do surveys, I think every several years. They recently put out a big survey. I want to say it was about 2 years ago. Over 50% of all physicians report feeling some sense of constant burnout or feeling one or more symptoms. And there's so many reasons why. Burnout is a symptom. And I think we need to address the root causes of burnout. If you look over medicine over the past decade, 2 decades, our need to fill out paperwork, mandated paperwork, computer work, I'm not going to necessarily call it paperwork, has risen exponentially. We are spending 2 times as many hours clicking on boxes, filling out paperwork, having to fight with insurance companies as we are with patient work. And lest you think that this is a complaint, take our paperwork away, we should be pointing out to the patients that every hour that we spend doing that work, we can't spend time with you. And in addition to the twice as many times during the active day, we also spend an additional 1 to 2 hours per night, and more than that on weekends, catching up on charts. So in 2009, when the electronic health record was mandated through the HIT Act, it's, I forget the acronym, but the High Tech Act, they call it. So the electronic records became mandated. Physicians then started to have to check a lot of boxes. And we are being measured on our data, presumably because a lot of medicine is paid for through federal government, channels. And I get it, the government is paying for part of healthcare. They want to make sure good quality work is coming out, but their measurements are laughable. And they're taking time away from our patients, and they're depersonalizing medicine. So there we are as physicians having these distractions that are getting in between our patient and our ability to care for our patient. And all these distractions in here, there are electronic record. You know, just think about it, that electronic record can break down, the computer can break down, and then we're spending even more time. The insurance companies, they're sitting in here, they're enforcing us to do pre-authorizations, prior authorizations, which are functionally, you know, just hoops to jump through so that we can get our patients the care they need and that we can actually be compensated for it. You know, frankly, I tell people this all the time. My little stock line is insurance companies can't provide care. They can only deny it and obstruct it. And that's what they're busy doing. And because of that, the patients are suffering. That's really dangerous. Insurance companies in our way, the hospitals have become tremendously powerful over the past decade, the hospital lobby. Most patients probably think, oh, the hospitals, they represent physicians. Physicians are being told what to do by administrators that never touch a patient. Never touch a patient. And here's a shocking fact for everyone listening to this interview. Between 1970 and 2009, the physician population mirrored the growth of the general population, 200% increase. In that same time period, healthcare administrators grew 3,000%. And between 2010 and 2014, we've added another 1 million healthcare administrators. So I think a lot of patients, they're angry, and they're justifiably angry, but they need to understand they're misplacing their anger, and they're placing it on the people that they see because they equate healthcare with their physicians. But honestly, patients and physicians should really join hands. We're fighting the same forces. And a lot of physicians are reticent to speak about this because as time has gone on, and especially big hospital conglomerates, you know, we've all seen the merger mania. They've grown. There's more physicians that are employed. And when you're employed, you're a little anxious to speak out, right? You know, you're kind of hushed because you need to keep your job. And then when you take that other statistic and tie it in there, you got $220,000 in loans, you really need to keep your job. So now I'm getting all the way and trying to tie it all together back to the burnout. We go to school, 4 years of college, 4 years of med school, an additional 3 to 11 years of training. That med school costs. During that training, we're being paid a pittance of a salary. Our debts are like, we can't pay them off during that time. The interest is piling up. We graduate, and now we've got someone who's had maybe a 4-year college degree telling us how to take care of our patients. And we have an insurance company mandating and practicing medicine and telling us how to take care of our patients. And who has to go back into the room with that patient, look them in the eye, and tell them that we can't get them the care that they need? Frankly, to us, who took an oath, a sacred oath to care for the patient first, frankly, it feels embarrassing. It feels demoralizing. It's professionally demoralizing. And I think this is adding to the burnout. Physicians now have the top suicide rate of all professions in America. Take heed, America, because, you know, you're losing your physicians in so many ways.
That's very powerful. There's a lot I can touch on there, or a lot where I can take this conversation, but I want to touch on what you just mentioned, which was patients and physicians need to get together and work together because
Mm-hmm.
we're fighting the same fight. And I say we because I'm not a physician.
Mm-hmm.
What are some steps that we can take to do that?
So I think patients need to empower themselves with some truth. And, you know, the number one truth they could search toward, it's the economy, stupid. I mean, look, this all runs. We have a medico-industrial complex because there's a lot of money in healthcare. I mean, when Medicare came out in the 60s, from that point, we have a cadre of players who swooped in and said, oh, wow, look at this growing, you know, this growing bowl of potential money. So all of these players swooped in on the healthcare pie. It's what, 1/5 of the economy projected to become 1/4. There's money there, right? So who do you have coming in? You have the insurance companies, you have the hospitals, you have pharma. Look at the EMR mandate. How much money do you think goes to healthcare IT? Every physician in America is currently spending $32,000 for their healthcare IT. So these expenses are mounting up, and writing on the wall. I mean, who's going to take this job? And I want people to take this job because it's the best job in the world. So how can physicians and patients get together? Patients need to start following the money trail in healthcare. I honestly think the new mantra should be cost and transparency. There's a website called Patients USA. It is a nonpartisan attempt to uncover the cost in healthcare. They're standing behind a bill that was co-authored by 2 lawmakers in Washington, D.C., Representatives Gallagher and Perlmutter. And the premise of their bill is that prices need to be transparent to the public so the public can start making decisions. And wow, don't we need that? Because we all have these huge deductibles, right? So here's a way in which patients and physicians can get together, because the physicians need to know about the cost and the price of things. We don't know. It's hidden from us because we have third-party payers that are paying everything. We don't realize the cost to the patient, but the patients are coming back to us and telling us we can't afford X, Y, and Z. So then we have to try to find a way, which adds to our time, and we're happy to do it, but it also takes away from our care time or direct patient time. But as physicians, we need to start to be aware of costs. We can only do it if those costs are transparent. I co-founded a group called the Practicing Physicians of America, and we have our own Facebook page. We also have a website. Our website is more for physicians. We are connected with multiple other groups that aim to educate both physicians and patients on all of these matters. And it's a real nonpartisan, or I call it transpartisan effort, because healthcare affects everyone. And the last group that I'll mention that's just terrific for patients to be aware of is something called Physicians Working Together. Physicians Working Together, PWT, I've been involved with them for several years. They were founded by a phenomenal family practice doctor in Columbus, Georgia, named Dr. Kimberly Jackson. And she's been, she's become like a sister to me. She's just wonderful. And we really feel that connecting patients and physicians and joining us back together is something we can do.
I agree. You're changing my perspective on a lot of things right now. And I appreciate that. Yeah, so I think it was called the Reinvestment Act in 2009. I actually was listening to, I believe, the Ezra Klein show, and he was interviewing Bill Gurley, who's a venture capitalist. He's the reason I know about this American Recovery, and I think it was called Reinvestment Act. The government subsidized $19.2 billion for health IT, allocated to help hospitals and physicians implement EHRs. And the interesting thing about this is the EHR companies were thrilled, obviously.
Of course.
But instead of the EHR companies innovating and having to sell their products, innovation was put by the wayside. And instead, all of their marketing collateral and all of their efforts went into things like how to get reimbursed with REHR, how to how to use it, basically. So it was a very, in my opinion, clunky effort to implement health IT. And as you alluded to, it caused probably more harm than good.
You mentioned the clunkiness of the EHR and what it was being made to do. You are so spot on, Zach. It's clunky in part because there's no interoperability. So it's like a whole bunch of companies came in, put out their products without any input from physicians. And they're getting input from the government of what the government wants them to data mine for us. So I'll actually give you an example. So my husband, he's a surgeon. He has 3 offices, and they had to purchase their EHR system, which cost them $125,000. But as ear, nose, and throat doctors, they had to report on a whole cadre of things that the government wanted to report on. So they had to, in every patient instance, to prove that they were using their computer meaningfully, they had to include a patient weight and a blood pressure. Now, this may seem like, oh, that's no big deal, but this is an ear, nose, and throat office. They don't have any reason to weigh their patients. They don't have any reason to do blood pressures in the patients. Now they have to take their staff, get their staff to do those things, both of them, get their staff to enter them into the computer. And by the way, they also had to enter every bit of patient information into their system, which took months. Now, why does the federal government need people's weights and people's blood pressures? Well, they're data mining. And then after a year, they change the parameters, and then they're looking for other information. So now from the ENT office, they have to check the box to say, I've asked if my patient smokes, and then, yes, no, my patient is smoking. So they're looking for that data. And it's not bad that they're collecting data, but the fact is they're putting it on the backs of the patient interaction. Collect your own data. Don't get in the way of me taking care of my patient and make me pay for it.
Oh, and I think it was, I don't want to quote, it was either Epic or Cerner, one of the big ones. I think it was Epic. There was a board member of Epic on the committee that passed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So
wow.
it was very messed up.
I'd love you to send me that information. It's of course it is. I personally think it's conspiracy. You have all these companies, all of them are profiting. And then like later down the line, I think we're all going to get funneled into one, but we've spent our money in all the companies. How are we getting that back?
Let's talk to all the pediatricians out there who are feeling a sense of burnt out or being stuck. How can they get out of their shell a little bit, even if they work at a big medical group or enterprise that's highly regulated like yourself? Mm-hmm. How can they get out of their shell like you seem to have been able to do and become an advocate for this cause, and this cause being, let's rewrite healthcare because it's not working?
I mean, we're lining up across these political aisles from each other and screaming generalities. One side, free market, repeal. The other side, socialized healthcare, Medicare for all. And, you can't take 40% on one side, 40% on the other, and a potential 20% in the middle and think that one size fits all solution is going to work. I mean, look, there's a chunk of people that believe that socialized medicine is the way to go. And there's a chunk of people that believe that it's completely the wrong way to go. I think we need to start getting together and talking about proof and ideas and solutions. And the best way to start the conversation, I think, is to start following the money trail in healthcare. So I tell physicians, start getting to know your state issues and the national issues, arm yourself, and then get in and start talking to your legislator. And it's a great year to do it because it's an election year. And these guys are going to be very responsive. And they're not hearing enough from either physicians or patients. But I think the physician who practices, who's the boots on the ground, he and she needs to get in there with their lawmaker and let them know what they're seeing.
Well, you keep mentioning pharma. I want you to dive in before we forget.
Oh, yeah. So it's no great secret, right? Drug prices, enormous, absolutely enormous. And most people want to vilify big pharma. I told you at the very beginning of this call that I worked for Merck when I was in high school. So I see what a company like Merck goes through in terms of R&D. I was doing some of that R&D myself. And I live here in southeastern Pennsylvania in Pharma Alley. I mean, we have a lot of pharmaceutical companies in this area. What the public is not aware about, and what physicians and some of the public are becoming more aware, there are middlemen that sit between pharma and the public that has needed medications or supplies. They're called pharmaceutical benefit managers for outpatient meds and group purchasing organizations for the hospital supply chain. Let's start with the GPOs, group purchasing organizations. It's hard. It's a very convoluted system. I'll do my best to simplify it. GPOs were formed in the 1920s initially to help hospitals negotiate prices for all of their supply. So not just medications, but normal saline, meds, oxygen tubing, bandages, the whole 9 yards. And they did this very effectively. And then in the 80s, someone got the grand idea that, well, hospitals, they're such wonderful, good people. They do so much community charitable work. And these hospitals got together with the group purchasing organizations and said, wow, us, the hospitals, we can't keep on spending this money to have you guys negotiate all these prices for us. Instead, the supply side should be paying. But what is that? That's a kickback, right? So in the 1980s, Congress passed this act called the Safe Harbor Act. It's legalized protection for kickbacks. So since the 1980s, the pharmaceutical supply and all the supply chain has to pay the group purchasing organizations to get their product to the market. And what this has done in terms of hospital supply is, after so many years, if you're manufacturing a drug, you have to make sure that you go through and your supply line is safe and sterile, and you have to revamp your equipment and get inspected and so on and so forth. Now you have the additional cost as a pharmaceutical company or a manufacturer of anything. You have the additional cost to have to pay the GPOs to get into the market. It's a pay-to-play scheme. It's just astounding. And several years after the GPOs got their safe harbor, the pharmaceutical benefit managers, the PBMs, they had their safe harbor added quietly. So that's happening on the outpatient side. So there's 4 big PBMs and there's 4 big GPOs. So for the PBMs, CVS Caremark, that's a PBM. Think about CVS Aetna merger. Now you have the people that are controlling the supply side, working with the insurance companies. Wow. Why is not America just absolutely scared? And since the inception of this safe harbor, pharmaceutical prices have soared. There's a phenomenal group that I work with called Physicians Against Drug Shortages, PADS for short. They've been investigating this for 6 to 10 years. Once again, bipartisan group, run by people that live on different sides of the aisle when they vote, but they both get it. And so does the rest of the group. And it's astounding what they've done in terms of research. Their website is just loaded. But who wants to listen when you got all this sweet money coming into your pocket? And it's really hard to gain traction with a lobby. We've been told that they're one of the most powerful lobbies in the country. The other thing that's really interesting, if you just look at it from a common sense perspective, these PBMs and GPOs, they don't do any research and development. They don't manufacture any product. They don't own any product. They're simply a middleman that are playing a shell game. And it's estimated on the hospital supply chain that they're sucking $100 billion out of the system every year.
I want to get your input on another thing. I interviewed Dr. Brian Vardabedian. He's a pediatrician at a Baylor University and Texas Children's, so another big hospital. He said that there's this thing going on where there are 2 problems. One is that technologists are developing healthcare tech. The best developers in Silicon Valley are bringing tech that works in other industries into healthcare just because they think it would benefit healthcare. But when in fact it really doesn't, right? A lot of convenience-oriented apps, a lot of sexy apps, we could say that, are being developed. So that's issue number 1. And then issue number 2, I think, is in line with everything we're talking about, in that these innovators who are really making impactful, game-changing technology, it's really tough to get their product in the door and at scale, even though that some technologists are developing tech that is truly game-changing and could have true impact on the healthcare ecosystem. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, wow. Well, let's go back to those GPOs again, because those GPOs are controlling devices as well. So you're 100% right. Getting that device into the market, you got to pay your pound of flesh to the GPOs to get it in there. So it's very obstructive. And the hospitals it gets a little deeper than that. To my understanding, the hospitals get paid by the GPOs, get paid, I think they call them compliance fees. So in other words, the more that they play with the GPOs, and 90% of the hospitals purchase through a GPO. So you're totally hosed with your new technology unless you have a chunk of change that you can toss their way. I mean, functionally, what is it but a bribe? I mean, that's outrageous, right? Yeah. I'll tell you a very interesting story, and I think everyone in America can relate to this. The EpiPen. You know about the EpiPen? How interesting, right? How those prices have soared. I mean, my son actually has food allergies, the oldest, and we used to pay, I think, initially like $20 copay for our EpiPen, and then over the ensuing years became 200 and then 600. And there's people that are running around that have kids with life-threatening food allergies that really can't. It's the groceries or the EpiPen, outrageous. Why did this happen? Well, the manufacturer of EpiPen, Mylan, is a company run by, I believe, Heather Bresch, I think is her name. And she's been, of course, grilled in Congress about this. But the interesting thing is her father is the Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia. Nice little aside there. The EpiPen took over the market several years back when something called AuviQ was removed from the market. AuviQ was manufactured by Sanofi, and the FDA claimed that they removed it from the market because there were too many misfires of the AuviQ. To my understanding, there have been just as many, if not more, misfires of the EpiPen. So AuviQ was invented by these interesting brothers. One is an MD PhD and one is an engineer, and they're phenomenal. These guys are what I call I'm not going to call them disruptive physicians. I'm going to call them heroes and pioneers. But they both suffer from food anaphylaxis, and the product that they invented, the AuviQ, they purchased back the rights from Sanofi, and they have their own company called Kaleo. And AuviQ is again out there on the market. It's an injectable epinephrine. The AuviQ talks to you to walk you through giving the epinephrine, which is very useful, because if your kid is like losing his airway and turning blue and wheezing and gasping, you're going to lose your cool, right? So it's nice to be talked through how to give the EpiPen. So their talkable injectable EpiPen is back there on the market, AuviQ. And I believe what physicians can do right now, and they should all know about this, especially your pediatricians, if they write the prescription for AuviQ and then get in touch with Kaleo Pharmaceuticals, anyone who has insurance or is under Medicaid, I think, ends up getting it for free with no copay. And then anyone who doesn't have insurance, I think they put in an application to Kaleo, and I think they get a refund. But the details are on the Kaleo website. And Kaleo is just working its way, I believe, what they're trying to do is work their way around the PBM. My guess is if they get a certain percentage of America's doctors to write prescriptions for AuviQ instead of EpiPen, well, then the insurance companies may start to pay back. So instead of them going to the PBMs, I bet what these guys are doing is instead offering their product for free, and then at some point insurance companies will probably allow them into the market. And they're not in the market right now because, my guess, probably they refuse to pay the PBMs off. It's very expensive, to get into the market. Sometimes it's 50% of the cost it takes you to get the drug out there. So the PBMs are taking away 50% of the profit. And by the way, as I said, companies that don't do any R&D, don't do any inventing, don't own any product, don't manufacture any product. What the heck are they doing there? Wow.
Yeah, I want to switch gears a little bit. What would you recommend the pediatricians read or research in regards to helping them getting out of their comfort zone and having their voice heard?
So let's start with, this is fabulous. So Catastrophic Care by David Goldhill is a really tremendous dissection of the healthcare system and how we're just bleeding money. So this is a great Bible for someone to be, aware of in healthcare. This is a really interesting book that talks about America's Bitter Pill by Stephen Brill. He put out a very famous article in Time magazine a couple of years ago. This is mostly about the passage of the ACA and how it happened. There's a lot of grassroots people. Here's my plug for my friend, Brian Dixon, who's a child psychiatrist in the great state of Texas. Brian has his own website called Change Health Today, and he wrote this book. It's a book about healthcare, and Brian gives a really brilliant synopsis of a system that I think is really a place where we should aspire to end up at, kind of a dual system where you have state-based exchanges that people can voluntarily participate in that are run by, they're actually functionally owned by the citizens of the state. It's really fascinating. And that actually works in tandem with the free market system. Midway through Mistreated by Robert Pearl. I believe he is the CEO of Kaiser Permanente. I read this book a few years ago. It is written by a conservative. It's called The Conservative Heart by Arthur Brooks. But how this spoke to me was it discussed how you can have conservative values and still be charitable. And it's really beautifully written. And so this kind of set me up with, no matter what my views are, no matter what anyone's views are, we should be speaking about them responsibly. And it talks about this. And don't laugh, but the last one, this is a gift from my parish priest. He had a stroke a few years ago. I helped take care of him. He left the parish and is now teaching in a seminary in Ohio. When he left the parish, he gave me this book. It's called Holy Women. And I was really blown away. I was touched. He wrote me a beautiful dedication to the book, thanked me for helping him with his stroke. And the very first chapter is about a woman who lived in the 1100s named Hildegard of Bingen.
Last question.
Yeah.
What would you tell your 25-year-old self? What advice would you give your 25-year-old self?
Wow. I think I would say, I'm trying to think, where was I at 25? College ended at 22, 23, 24. I was a third year in medical school. That was a great year for me. That's the year my husband and I started dating. And I think I would tell my 20-year-old self that keep laughing, try to find the humor and beauty in every day. And every opportunity you have to be with your friends and loved ones and hold them close and pull them closer, take it, because you just don't know what's around the corner.
That's an amazing answer. I have one more question. What's in store for your future? What do you want to accomplish over the next couple of years as it relates to medicine, healthcare, being a physician? I'd love to know, and I'm sure the audience would love to know.
Oh, I want to keep on taking care of my patients to the best of my ability. And still continuing to do education and grow. I want to be able to leave my profession better than I found it, and better. I think it's going in the wrong direction. So for future physicians, I want them to have a better profession in which they are unfettered to take care of the patients to the best of their ability with minimal obstruction from all of those things that we talked about that are causing burnout. I want to be able to connect more physicians with doing what I'm doing. I don't want to be the only one doing this. It's quite frankly, this is pretty exhausting. I was down in DC yesterday and the day before, and I came back and I went to an event last night, and I'm meeting with a Pennsylvania lawmaker later today, and I got a lot to do. So I want more physicians to get involved. I want to inspire physicians to say, hey, they don't even have to agree with me. I mean, I want them to say, hey, I want to talk to her. I want to find out what she knows. They can come challenge me. I don't mind at all. They can come disagree. Let's have a respectful discussion and dialogue. So what's in the future? How about I just start by saying I want to leave medicine better than I'm finding it now.
How can physicians get in touch?
You can look on practicingphysicians.org. Look up Practicing Physicians of America, and you can contact us through that website. You can also contact us on our Facebook group.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Marion, for taking the time today.
Oh, what an honor. You made it so easy. It was, a great interview. And I have plenty of friends I'd be more than happy to send you to, because they're doing great things too.
Bring them on. I love it. I need more people like you.
Okay. Sounds terrific.